I'm going to write up the gold by 5 trillion. If I write up the gold by 5 trillion, every trillion is 4,000 bucks. So that's $20,000.
His proposal here that he's talking about is he's saying that the Treasury could write up the value of that gold to $20,000 per ounce, for example, right? They could pick a different price as well. But if they pick $20,000 per ounce, then we just multiply $20,000 per ounce times the number of ounces they have, okay, about a quarter of a trillion. And the Treasury would end up with $5 trillion of cash that they could do whatever they wanted with. What I think is super important is if we think through who wins and who loses in a scenario like this. Hello, Gold Silver family. Alan Hibbert here with another video. And today I want to talk about $20,000 an ounce gold. It could be possible. Some people have been talking about it lately, possibly raising the statutory price of gold to $20,000 an ounce because it might solve the debt to GDP problem. So perhaps some of you have seen this tweet here from Eric Young. It's an explanation from Luke Groman on how the U.S. Treasury can get the U.S. debt to GDP ratio from 130% down to 40% by revaluing physical gold from its current price of $2,400 an ounce to $20,000 per ounce. Okay, so this is really sensationalistic, basically a 10x in the price of gold. Is it possible? What does it mean? What does it mean for gold owners? What does it mean for people who don't own gold? And what does it mean for people in the United States and abroad? So these are some of the questions I want to go through in today's video. I want to do a deep dive on this exact scenario. So first, let me play a clip from Luke Groman's interview here, and you can hear his words for yourself.
I think gold is ultimately how they get out of this. There are provisions in the Federal Reserve Bank operating manual by which the Treasury, United States Treasury Secretary, can instruct the Fed to write up the gold, the US's gold, and the accounting treatment of that is a deposit, free and clear, no debt attached to it, into the U.S. Treasury general account.
Okay, so Luke here is talking about the Treasury writing up the value of its gold. Let's see what it looks like. I've got Excel. I know some of you are terrified of Excel. Don't worry. We're going to make it nice and simple, okay? Let's see here what he's talking about. He's basically saying that the Treasury has roughly $11 billion worth of gold because they have 261 million ounces of gold at a statutory price of $42 per ounce, $42 per ounce. Okay, so if you multiply these together, you get about $11 billion. And his proposal here that he's talking about is he's saying that the Treasury could write up the value of that gold to $20,000 per ounce, for example, right? They could pick a different price as well. But if they pick $20,000 per ounce, then we just multiply $20,000 per ounce times the number of ounces they have, okay, about a quarter of a trillion. And the Treasury would end up with $5 trillion of cash that they could do whatever they wanted with, okay? And his idea is that they could take that $5 trillion of cash and buy back a lot of the bonds outstanding, okay? So let's listen to the rest of his clip.
If you said, Luke, your Treasury Secretary, how can you get out of this? We need to get our debt to GDP down right away. How do we get out of this debt spiral? I call up the Fed. Powell, it's over. You've lost the long end no matter what you do. Write up the gold to, I don't know. It's a $24 trillion Treasury market. Prices are probably down, what? Mark, face value 30% on average over the last 2-3 years. So the real market value of the U.S. Treasury market, I don't know, 12 trillion, it's 15 trillion for round math. I'm going to write up the gold by 10 trillion, right? So it's $40,000 per, just actually do 5 trillion, just take a third of the debt out. I'm going to write up the gold by 5 trillion. If I write up the gold by 5 trillion, every trillion is 4,000 bucks. So that's $20,000. And I get 5 trillion deposited into the TGA, free and clear. I go out into the market and I buy back a third of the U.S. debt outstanding. Now it's a $10 trillion market value market against GDP of 27 trillion, give or take. Voila. We've gone from 120 to 40% in one stroke. Thank you for your donation, Treasury holders. Now, inflation rips, the dollar probably sells off quite a bit, but that's all in the cake.
Okay, so there are a lot of numbers there. Let's unpack them one at a time. First, I want to explain exactly what he's talking about so we all understand it. And then I want to talk about the implications for people who own gold, the people who own treasuries, the people in the United States, and the people abroad. Okay, so let's go through what he's talking about here. He's saying that basically right now, the treasury market is a $24 trillion treasury market. So this here looks like 24 million, okay? But these numbers are in millions, so this is 24 trillion. And there's also 10 trillion of intragovernmental debt for a total debt outstanding of about 34 trillion, okay? And just in case you're not sure the differences here, I want to pull this up. This is actually from Wikipedia, but you could learn a lot about this just reading that page. Basically, the two kinds of debt outstanding are debt held by the public and intragovernmental debt holdings, basically like in the Social Security Trust Fund and so forth. So there's two different types of debt here. They'll become important in just a second, but don't worry about it right now. So the current debt to GDP, how do we figure that out? Well, we take total debt and we divide it by GDP. Very simple. The current GDP is about 27 trillion. It's actually closer to 28, but with the numbers that Luke is talking about 27 trillion. And if you want to know the current debt to GDP, you just divide total debt by GDP. Very simple. And so here we are around 126%. I think he called it 130%. Close enough. Close enough. Okay. Moving right along. What is he saying? He's saying that the current real value of the treasury outstanding is 15 trillion. Okay. So currently it's actually 24 trillion. That's just nominally. And he's saying that the real value is only about 15 trillion for sake of round numbers. Again, we could debate that. We could say it's 16 or it's 14. It doesn't really matter the number that we pick. We're just going to follow through the logic of this whole idea of writing up the price of gold. Okay, that's the only thing we're worried about. We're not worried about if these numbers are exact or if they're good assumptions. We're just looking at the bigger picture here. So let's take his number of about 15 trillion and say that's a good assumption. And he's saying this $5 trillion that comes from writing up the statutory price of gold that the Treasury can use. He's saying we can use that 5 trillion to buy back some of this debt so that there's only 10 trillion outstanding. 15 minus 5 equals 10. Okay. Hopefully that's good so far. So if the real value of the treasury market is only 10 trillion, now we can calculate the new debt to GDP ratio. All we have to do is add in that original treasury debt, which we're saying is now 10, add in the intragovernmental debt that we left off a second ago, and we're up to 20. And then we divide that amount, that's our new debt, 20, by the GDP, 27. 20 out of 27 is roughly 74. Now, what he's calculating is this new lower 10 divided by 27. And that's where he's getting a number like 30% or 40%. He's basically only looking at the treasury market. He's ignoring the intergovernmental debt. This is a minor difference for purposes of the concept we're looking at. So whether we call it 37% or 74%, it doesn't really matter, right? The whole purpose of this video is to kind of think through what would happen if the treasury increases the statutory price of gold to something dramatic like $20,000 per ounce. What would happen? Okay, so debt to GDP would lower. The exact number, not that important for right now. Okay, so does that mean that gold holders get rich? I wouldn't say so. All right, let's think through some of the implications here. And by the way, at the very end of that clip, Luke said two very important things. He says, "Thank you for your donation, treasury holders." And he also said, "Inflation rips, the dollar probably sells off quite a bit, but that's all baked into the cake." And he's right. So by the way, in this whole clip, I don't think there's anything wrong that he's saying. I believe it's all correct. And, you know, aside from minor quibbles about the exact numbers, which doesn't matter, you know, I think it's all accurate. What I think is super important is if we think through who wins and who loses in a scenario like this. Okay. So if the Treasury increases the statutory price of gold, first thing to realize is that doesn't affect the market price of gold right away. Okay. That's only the statutory price. And that doesn't do anything to change the value of gold itself. Gold is its own thing, and no bureaucrat, no policy can change what gold is. The only thing that a policy can do is actually devalue that currency. So in the case of the US Treasury, it would be the US dollar. So they can devalue the US dollar, but the value of gold doesn't change. That's very important to remember. Secondly, if the statutory price goes up to $20,000 per ounce of gold, or just anything really, really high very quickly, right, at the stroke of a pen, that effectively devalues the dollar overnight. And so two things would happen. The market price of gold would probably rise to match it, or very close, very quickly. Okay, so the market price of gold would probably rise naturally. And two, the market price of all other goods and services would also rise to reflect the weak dollar, the weak currency. Okay, so what does that mean for your purchasing power? What does that mean if you live in the United States? What does it mean if you live abroad? What does it mean if you own gold or you don't? Let's look at these one at a time.
Hi, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for subscribing and mention that if you'd like to help our channel, please consider my company, GoldSilver.com, the next time you buy precious metals. We're one of the most trusted names in the industry. Our prices are sharp, delivery is fast, and we have an insiders program where you find out exactly what I'm doing with my own investments. Thanks for making GoldSilver.com your dealer, and now back to the video.
Let's look at these one at a time. All right, so if you live in the United States and you own gold, what happens? Well, your purchasing power is going to be the same. It's going to be the same. And you're going to have the same purchasing power in the United States and abroad. I wouldn't say that you get a lot richer. Why is that? Okay, let's suppose that the price of gold goes up 10x. Let's say from 2,000 to 20,000. It goes up 10x. Did you get 10 times richer? I don't think so, because the prices of all other goods and services will also go up 10x. So you'll be able to buy the same things that you could buy before. That's really, really important to understand. You will probably have the same purchasing power. Okay, that may be surprising to people, but that's how it is. All right, what if you're in the United States and you don't own gold? Well, the prices of everything are going to go up approximately 10x. So you're going to have 90% less purchasing power in the US. And if you travel abroad, you'll also have 90% less purchasing power, because the exchange rate between the dollar and every other currency is going to move roughly by a factor of 10. So you'll lose 90% of your purchasing power, whether you stay in the United States or if you travel abroad. That is a tremendous difference. And if you live in the United States, you could ask yourself, would I rather own gold or not own gold? Well, do you want to be able to afford the same stuff or 90% less? I mean, it's easy decision in my mind. All right. What about if you live in the United States and you own treasuries? Well, actually, if you own treasuries or if you don't own treasuries, you have the exact same scenario, because a dollar and a treasury are effectively the same thing on the other side of this program that we're talking about. If raising the statutory price and buying back debt, whether you have a dollar today or a dollar tomorrow, it's effectively the same thing. And a treasury just means you have a dollar tomorrow. So in either case, you're going to have 90% less purchasing power all over the world. So not much of a difference here. Okay, what if you live abroad? Well, if you own treasuries, those treasuries are going to be worth 90% less. So that dollar portion of your portfolio will have 90% less purchasing power no matter where you go to spend it. However, if you go to the United States, you'll have the same purchasing power. You'll have the same purchasing power. Okay, what if you live abroad and you don't have treasuries? Well, you'll have the same purchasing power in your country because you're immune to the dollar. But if you want to travel to the United States, you'll have 10 times the purchasing power. You'll have 10 times the purchasing power because the exchange rate between the dollar and your currency will fluctuate in your favor by about 10x. That's tremendous. Okay, one more group here. if you live abroad and you don't own gold, what happens? Well, actually, it's the same thing. Whether you own gold or you don't, this is very interesting. You're going to have the exact same outcome. Why? Well, it goes back to one of the principles we talked about at the beginning. Increasing the statutory price of gold doesn't change what gold is. All you're doing is devaluing your own currency. So gold doesn't actually change. And so if you live abroad, whether or not you own gold wouldn't matter in a scenario like this. So you'll have the same purchasing power in your own country that you had before. But if you travel to the United States, you'll be able to buy 10 times as much stuff, again, because the exchange rate moves favorably for you by a factor of 10. So going back to these quotes that Luke had, thank you for your donation, Treasury holders. He's exactly right. Anyone who owns treasuries is going to have 90% less purchasing power. And this is really anyone who owns treasuries, but also who owns the dollar, because the dollar would tank. So, right, he says inflation rips, the dollar probably sells off quite a bit, but that's all baked into the cake. So his point here, well, I guess there's really three pieces here. Inflation rips. So yes, the prices of goods and services in the United States would rise by roughly 10x. The dollar probably sells off quite a bit. That means the exchange rate between the dollar and foreign currencies will also move by about 10x, but that's all baked into the cake. So he's arguing that it's kind of inevitable. It's going to happen anyways in the long run. Maybe that point is up for debate, but when we look at any fiat monetary system, we kind of know how they all end. So it is a question of which fiat systems fail before others. So maybe it's baked into the cake. Maybe part of it is baked into the cake. There's a bit of nuance there. But anyways, let's look at the overall change here and see who wins and who loses as a result of this. Well, if you own gold in the United States, or let's put it this way. If you own gold, no matter where you live, what is your best case scenario? What is your worst case scenario? Well, your best case scenario is if you live outside the United States, you'll be able to go to the United States and have 10 times the purchasing power. So you could travel to the United States and live like a king and afford whatever you want. However, for everybody else who owns gold, they have the same purchasing power that they would have had before. The same. So nothing went down, which is very important. But for U.S. citizens, purchasing power doesn't go up. Very, very interesting. Okay, for people who don't own gold, well, it's kind of a coin flip. It's very volatile. They could end up with 90% less purchasing power. They could end up with 10 times more purchasing power, or it could be the same. So it's very volatile. If you don't own gold, what could happen to you is very volatile. Could go up, could go down based on it being your home country or a foreign country. So that right there kind of shows you that owning gold reduces your downside risk. Not owning gold keeps you in a very volatile situation where you're subject to the whims of bureaucrats. And owning treasuries, not looking too pretty here. Basically 90% less purchasing power in almost all scenarios here. Because the type of scenario we're talking about here is when a country devalues its own currency. That's really all they can do. They can't really make it stronger with the stroke of a pen, but they can certainly make it weaker. So a lot of implications here. And if we look at, let's see here, owning treasuries abroad, it's worth pointing out that some of the biggest holders of US treasuries are foreign governments. It used to be China for a very long time, and then they started reducing their exposure to treasuries. Now they're the second largest holder of treasuries. Number one is Japan. And so if the United States does something like this, and it cuts 90% of the purchasing power of whoever is holding treasuries, that is not going to be seen as a nice thing to do in the eyes of Japan, China, etc. And if you guys saw my video from 5 days ago, Chinese gold trading explodes, I talked about the global power dynamic between the US and China and how things are tense, okay? And how China is buying up a lot of the world's gold, and that there's a chess game at play, and we really don't want to see things escalate with aggressive moves. And something like what we're talking about here in this video, raising the statutory price of gold to $20,000 an ounce, which effectively amounts to devaluing the dollar and devaluing treasuries, that could be seen as an extremely aggressive move in the eyes of China. And I just saw this tweet today. This comes from the Chinese foreign minister, and he gave a speech here in Chinese, and it's translated. And part of what he said is, the U.S. is the #1 warmonger in the world. The U.S. has attempted to overthrow more than 50 foreign governments, blatantly interfered in elections in at least 30 countries, and attempted to assassinate more than 50 foreign leaders. So whether or not that's true, whether or not these numbers are accurate, is of less importance. The important thing here is that the Chinese foreign minister wouldn't just come out and say these things at random. There must be some reason. And if you think about the global chess game, moves follow each other in a logical sequence. So whatever it is that China is planning to do next is going to logically follow from a speech like this. So China wants to show the world what it thinks of the United States. Okay, whether or not it's accurate is kind of irrelevant for today. And you know, I don't know what they're going to do next, but what we're talking about here, just raising the statutory price of gold, would effectively impoverish China by 90%, and that would probably lead to escalating tensions. So I know that we all get very excited at the prospect of the price of gold going up, but we don't want it to come at the cost of World War III. We don't want it to come at the cost of people losing all their money. So this is kind of the tough spot that we're in, where we want to be protected. We want to increase our wealth. We want to protect our purchasing power, but we don't want to root for a scenario where other people lose their livelihoods as a result. So hopefully you guys found this entertaining and instructive. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to elaborate on it. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.